A pre-dawn federal raid on a residential property in a quiet suburb this morning ended with agents hauling crate after crate out of a converted three-car garage, and by mid-morning, the man whose name was on the deed was in federal custody. Agents say the property belonged to a sitting police chief, and what they found inside wasn't a hobby collection. It was an armory. This story starts with a man who counted guns for a living. His name was Marcus Delane. He was 47 years old. For the past 9 years, he had worked as the evidence and property room supervisor for a mid-sized municipal police department in the Midwest, the department that Chief Raymond Aldous ran. Delane's job was not glamorous. He did not carry a badge on patrol. He did not work cases. He logged. He tagged. He signed chain of custody forms on every firearm that came through his department's doors. Every weapon seized from a crime scene, every weapon voluntarily surrendered, every weapon pulled from a suicide, every weapon recovered from a raid. And for 9 years, he had also been the last man to sign off before a destroyed firearm was supposedly cut apart, melted down, and logged out of existence forever. For 6 of those 9 years, an unknown number of those weapons had never been destroyed at all. The department was called Root County Metro Police, a respected mid-sized force serving a community of roughly 140,000 people, a department with a decade-clean accreditation record and a chief who had built a reputation as a reformer, a man who gave conference keynotes on transparency in policing, who had personally overseen a public gun buyback and destruction program that had, on paper, taken more than 3,000 weapons off the street over 8 years. A logo that appeared in local news segments about community trust, praised as a model for departments twice its size. Beneath that reputation, a different program had been running. Chief Aldous had quietly diverted a rotating subset of firearms from 3 separate streams: the buyback program, the evidence room's destruction pending queue, and decommissioned department service weapons, into a private inventory that never left the building on paper, but never stayed in it in practice. The paperwork said, destroyed. The reality was a chain of unmarked transport off the books, moving weapons roughly 12 miles from the department's evidence facility to a converted 3-car garage behind Aldous's private residence, a property zoned residential, sitting on 2 acres at the edge of town, screened from the road by a tree line and a locked gate. The garage looked from the outside like an oversized workshop. Neighbors who had glimpsed inside over the years described pegboards, workbenches, what looked like a hobbyist's gunsmithing setup. What federal agents eventually found was a fully outfitted illegal armory, rack after rack of rifles and handguns, several dozens of them modified with aftermarket auto-sears and drop-in conversion parts that took semi-automatic firearms and made them capable of fully automatic fire. Federally regulated machine guns that had never been registered, manufactured, or transferred through any lawful process. Alongside them, cases of ammunition, several untraceable firearms with obliterated serial numbers, and a locked file cabinet containing years of falsified destruction certificates, each one bearing Marcus Delane's supervisor's signature. Delane had been signing those certificates for years without knowing at first what they actually meant. In his telling, it started small, a chief he trusted asking him to hold a batch of weapons an extra few weeks before the destruction vendor came, paperwork already pre-filled, just needing a signature. By the 3rd year, the requests were monthly. By the 6th year, Delane understood exactly what he was signing and exactly what would happen to him, professionally and possibly criminally, the moment anyone looked closely at the paper trail with his name on it. In late autumn of last year, Delane began to notice something that unsettled him more than the weapons themselves. He was being quietly cut out. New destruction paperwork was appearing without going through him first. A junior officer had started handling intake on the buyback program independently. The pattern was familiar to him because he'd watched it happen to a records clerk 2 years earlier, a woman transferred to a satellite office overnight and never spoken of again inside the department. Delane understood what it looked like for a person being moved off the schedule. He believed he was next, not to a transfer, but to becoming the one name attached to years of falsified federal firearms paperwork, with no one above him to share the blame. In January, he drove 90 minutes outside county lines and walked into an ATF field office on a Tuesday morning and asked to speak to someone about firearms he believed had never been destroyed. Hit like, subscribe, and drop "exposed" in the comments so this reaches the people who need to see it. The investigation that followed took 11 months. It required extraordinary discretion because the target wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. He was law enforcement at the top of a department, with relationships across county government, a seat on the Regional Police Chiefs Association, and years of built-up public trust that made the early allegations, on their face, hard for some investigators to believe. The infiltration point was Delane's own paper trail, which agents used to reconstruct, weapon by weapon, exactly how many firearms had entered the destruction pending queue and never come back out. Working with federal firearms tracing databases, agents matched serial numbers against manufacturer and destruction vendor records and found a 6-year gap. Hundreds of firearms logged as destroyed with no corresponding destruction vendor invoice, no meltdown certificate, no witness disposal, the entire final step of the process resting on nothing but Aldous's internal sign-off. What agents didn't yet understand was who had taught him how to build a gap that wide without anyone noticing. That answer came from a name buried in call records pulled from Aldous's personal phone. Douglas Prentice, 61, a retired ATF industry operations specialist who had spent 22 years as a federal firearms compliance inspector before retiring 8 years earlier. Prentice had spent his career auditing federally licensed dealers and law enforcement destruction programs for exactly the kind of gaps he later helped design. Within a year of his retirement, he had been retained as a private compliance consultant through a small firm called Heartland Regulatory Advisors, ostensibly hired to help Root County Metro modernize its firearms disposal record-keeping. In practice, investigators would later determine Prentice had shown Aldous precisely which fields in a destruction file federal auditor checked, which they didn't, and how a signature from a trusted supervisor like Delane could make an unverified paper record functionally audit-proof for years. In encrypted messages recovered from a laptop seized at Prentice's home, he referred to himself, in conversation with Aldous, only as the consultant. Investigators believed the diverted weapons were never sold or moved beyond the property. No evidence emerged of trafficking to outside buyers. What agents found instead looked, in the words of one federal affidavit, like a private arsenal assembled under color of law, its purpose still under investigation, but its scale undeniable. The raid happened at dawn. At 5:10 a.m. on a Wednesday, a federal magistrate judge signed simultaneous search warrants for 4 locations: the Aldous residence and garage, Root County Metro's evidence facility, Prentice's home, and the office of Heartland Regulatory Advisors. At 5:40 a.m., FBI and ATF tactical teams moved in. At the residence, agents used a breaching tool to open the garage's side entrance after knocking and announcing themselves, but received no response. Chief Aldous was detained inside the main house without incident, still in bedclothes, as agents secured the property. Inside the garage, agents cataloged the contents room by room over the following 11 hours. 500 firearms in total, of which 61 had been illegally converted to fully automatic fire, 14 had obliterated serial numbers, and the remainder were a mix of handguns and rifles matching serial numbers to the department's own destroyed logs going back 6 years. Agents also recovered 3 unregistered suppressors, several thousand rounds of ammunition, and the locked file cabinet of falsified destruction certificates. At the evidence facility, agents secured the department's remaining firearms inventory, sealed the destruction pending queue, and began an independent physical audit of every serial number on record, a process that would ultimately take federal auditors an additional 5 weeks to complete. At Prentice's home, agents recovered the laptop containing the encrypted message archive, along with 2 additional firearms later matched to the diverted inventory, and roughly $140,000 in cash found in a floor safe. By early afternoon that Wednesday, 7 people were in federal custody: Chief Raymond Aldous, Douglas Prentice, 2 Root County Metro officers who had assisted in unmarked transport of the weapons from the evidence facility to the residence, and 3 individuals tied to Heartland Regulatory Advisors on related record-keeping fraud charges. Marcus Delane was not among them. He had been placed under a federal witness protection arrangement 4 months before the raid, relocated with his wife and 2 teenage children to a different region of the country, his name scrubbed from department records under a cooperating witness protocol. He watched the raid unfold that morning from a hotel room television, an investigation he had personally set in motion 11 months earlier with a 90-minute drive and a decision to talk. Federal prosecutors have so far charged Aldous with multiple counts of unlawful possession of unregistered machine guns, obstruction of justice, and falsification of federal firearms records, with additional charges pending. Prentice faces charges of conspiracy and obstruction tied to his role advising on the department's disposal program. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives has opened a nationwide review of law enforcement firearms destruction protocols, focused specifically on departments that rely on internal sign-off rather than independent third-party verification for weapons marked destroyed. A separate federal review is examining post-retirement consulting restrictions on former ATF compliance inspectors who take private work advising organizations they once regulated. I want to come back to Marcus Delane because there's something about how this case actually broke that matters more than the number 500. This case didn't break because of a routine ATF audit. It didn't break because state accreditation reviewers caught a discrepancy, and it didn't break because a neighbor called in a tip about the garage. 6 years of institutional oversight, state accreditation boards, county budget reviews, the department's own internal affairs unit, had looked at Root County Metro's buyback program and seen exactly what it had been built to show them: a well-run, well-regarded department with a clean accreditation file and a chief who gave speeches about transparency. The case broke because a 47-year-old evidence room supervisor in a department of roughly 200 sworn officers noticed, quietly, that his name was being lifted off the paperwork before anyone else's. He drove 90 minutes to a federal office he had no jurisdictional reason to walk into. He gave agents 6 years of serial numbers, knowing that doing so meant becoming, permanently, the man who turned on his own chief. He gave them the numbers, knowing his wife would have to leave a house she'd lived in for 15 years, and his kids would have to start over in a school where nobody knew their names. He gave them the numbers because he understood that no state review board was ever going to find that garage on its own. And because he understood that if he didn't say something, no one else in that building was in a position to. The operation had been running for 6 years before Marcus Delane made that drive. It survived state accreditation cycles, county budget audits, internal affairs reviews, and glowing local news coverage of a police chief who had built his public identity on the idea of accountability. It did not survive a property room supervisor who quietly wrote down serial numbers for months and drove them across a county line. If a private, illegal armory of 500 weapons, dozens of them converted to fully automatic fire, could be assembled over 6 years inside the residence of a sitting police chief, hidden behind a public record of reform and a decade of clean audits. The question worth sitting with isn't how it happened once. It's how many other garages, in how many other towns, are sitting quietly behind a chief's house tonight, unaudited, unremarked, waiting for someone inside the building to notice their own name sliding off the paperwork, and to decide what they're going to do about it before someone decides it for them. By the time federal prosecutors sat down to build their case against Curtis Wren and the 2 additional departments tangled up in his fraudulent paperwork, a pattern had started to emerge that investigators hadn't expected. This wasn't one corrupt chief exploiting one weak vendor. It was a system that had been quietly designed over years to make the final step of gun destruction unverifiable by default, a blind spot big enough that 3 separate departments had walked through it without ever needing to coordinate with each other. Wren's cooperation gave agents something else too: a shipping manifest, buried in an old email thread that didn't match any of the 3 departments already under investigation. It referenced a 4th jurisdiction, out of state, that federal agents had not yet contacted. As of this writing, that lead remains open, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has declined to comment on whether additional search warrants are being prepared. For Chief Aldous, the walls have continued closing in. A federal grand jury has since added additional charges tied to the falsified certificates recovered from his garage, and prosecutors have signaled they intend to seek a sentence that reflects not just the illegal weapons, but the 6 years of public trust he spent building the exact reputation that let him hide them. Douglas Prentice, the retired ATF inspector who taught him how to do it, is reportedly negotiating a plea deal that would require him to testify against Aldous in exchange for a reduced sentence. The regulator who once found these gaps for a living, now explaining to a jury exactly how he built one. And Marcus Delane, the man who started all of it with a 90-minute drive and a stack of serial numbers, is still living under a new name in a state he won't name, still watching this story grow bigger than the case he first walked into that ATF field office to report. He always said he didn't think of himself as a whistleblower. He said he just couldn't keep signing his name to something he knew wasn't true. 3 weeks after Wren opened his books, the 4th jurisdiction agents had been chasing finally had a name. A county 2 states east, where a retired deputy chief had quietly run his own version of the same scheme for nearly a decade. When federal agents arrived with a warrant, they found something Root County never had: a buyer. Financial records revealed an undocumented sale of 11 converted firearms to a man already under federal investigation for an unrelated weapons charge. For the first time, the case wasn't just about hoarding. It was about supply. Prosecutors now believe Prentice's playbook had quietly been sold to more than one department, turning a single chief's private obsession into something closer to a network. The grand jury reconvenes next month. Marcus Delane, watching from wherever he is now, reportedly told investigators only one thing when he heard the news. "I knew there had to be more than one garage."